now let's take a look at the example from the text, the jQuery FAQs list application that will implement all of the DOM spec and DOM methods that we had just spoken about in this lecture. So if you see here, we're on click, right? So that's a toggle class. More than likely, there is a class here that needs to be hidden or shown, right? So when you look at something, you should inspect it and just take a quick look at it. And you can see, which we talked about in the lecture, how JavaScript can apply that class. So check this out. See how it says JavaScript is a library? Right now, there's nothing hiding it. But if I toggle a class, you see how it says div class equals open? So look at this, div class equals open, display block, right? Now we move it, div class is empty. Open. Now take a look at the class plus or minus, right? So h2, let's go ahead and do that as well. So h2, you'll see the plus becomes a minus, minus becomes a plus. So we're toggling the class and the console showing what's happening with it. So that said, let's take a look at our code because you get a good idea of how we're handling this. So the code itself, we've got an ID called FAQs, which holds everything. Okay, always look for the ID because a lot of times we programmers will target that first and then target the children. Now, one of the beautiful things about these text editors is that everything's indented properly. The children are indented 4 tabs, or 1 tab, 4 spaces from the parent. And if I were to do edit line reindent, you see nothing happen because it's perfectly edited, perfectly aligned. But if you were to do this on something that didn't have appropriate reindentation, you'd get that nice visual tree of what is a child of what. Okay. So in this case, we're going to use strict, and there will be a link in this week's modules to explain what use strict is. But this, first thing we're going to do is do an add event listener for DOM content loaded. So when this event happens, all the elements of the DOM are loaded. Now, in this case, if you go back to the Chrome tools, and what we're going to do is just do a hard reload, but I'm going to take a real good look at the network tab down here. And I want you to look for the DOM content loaded. So we're doing this, and you can see down here, the DOM content loaded in 57 microseconds, but we had other things that were not part of the content, and so everything loaded was 93 milliseconds. But the DOM itself, so what is the DOM itself? It's the document object model, the tags themselves, before the dependencies like images were loaded. So that said, let's go back to the code. A lot going on here. It always is when we talk about the DOM. So once the DOM loads, then this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to get the header 2 elements, which equals FAQs. Now remember, main IDs, FAQs. So go back to this. You see that? That's what we're targeting. So we'll get the FAQs, query selector all. So this is all H2s for FAQs. So let's see how many H2 tags we have. Well, there's 1, there's 2, right? And there's 3 here. So there are 3 H2s, which are all the H2 tags on what is jQuery, why use jQuery, which is hard to learn, jQuery or JavaScript. Now, back to the JS itself, we can loop around these things. And what we're saying is, okay, well, let's loop around the collection of H2s, of which there are 3, and on each turn of that loop, we're letting H2 element be each element. So at that point, we've broken apart all of the H2 tags, and we're going to have an event listener added saying, okay, when someone clicks on each of these H2 elements, let's toggle. Okay? This is our toggle. So the toggle has an event that comes in. Now, just let me show you what the EVT does here, because this is a pretty cool thing. I've shown this before in more vanilla JS in the earlier sessions, but let's take a real good look at the console, and I'm targeting the EV. So there's the toggle. So this is EVT. Again, to get this, I logged EVT, which is, again, if you know the arrow syntax from a couple weeks ago, it's the variable that gets sent. Now, we didn't send any argument inside this function. We just called the function. But the event tells us everything about the event, including, oh my gosh, the altitude angle of the click. Like, for real. Isn't that hilarious? So we've got an alt key that doesn't exist, all these properties that they might exist or may not. This is, okay, layer X is 538, layer Y is 537. That's right here. So it's X 538 pixels from the left side of the screen, 57 down. So you can see there that's exactly identical to page X, page Y. So these are just fantastic to have fun with it. Take a good look. But that is what the EVT is. Okay? So now H2 element is the event current target. Well, hey, let's look at this. We've got it open, right? What is the current target? It says null because it's null because it's not in the scope of what we're doing. However, it does still have that value. Even though it's null, don't be confused. It's still necessary to have this because the H2 event is what came. The H2 element is legit from the event. So even though it's not null at this point, it's there. As a matter of fact, the div element would be the H2 element next element sibling. So what would be the next element sibling of each H2? Well, this is the element itself, right? And so it would have to be the next element, but also on the same level because it's a sibling. We call our brothers and sisters siblings because they're the same as us. They're not our parent, they're not our child, but the brother and sister is a sibling. So really the div is the brother or sister to the H2 because it's on the same level. So this is the next element sibling. And what we're going to do now is to make sure that that's the div, and we name the variables very intelligently because that's what they are. It's an H2 element and div element. And all we're doing here is toggling the minus and toggling the open. Okay, so event.prevent default. This will cancel the default action of the H2's anchor tag. So instead of having the H2 be, have a new anchor, which is, you can see the URL at the status bar here, the index.html. Instead of having that reload those values, like let's comment it out just for kicks to show you how important it is to have EVT prevent defaults. And so I'm going to cancel that, and now it's loaded. So now watch the URL window. Oh, you see how it had hashtag? Well, if this had a different ahref, it would actually take the page to that. So that's why we have event prevent default. We'll leave that open. You'll also notice that the H2 element's first child gets focused on when we load. So this is the entire application, but let's take another look at it. Hit refresh. We'll remove this hashtag. Event prevent default happens. Toggle minus, toggle plus. So let's take a look at the toggle with the class. So minus means we have an image. So class here, you see the image plus? That is the background image on the default state, right? When we do open, or minus, the background image becomes the images / minus. That's why the image gets changed as well as the div. So the div is either display block or display none. So here's the H2, right? And at this point, the div, and it's open. You see it's display none right there. Now watch we do this again. It says display block. So we're seeing it change with the toggle class. And that is a very, I think, a strong example in this chapter of the HTML DOM elements and the DOM methods that we use to target elements and change them based on a user-driven event. I would also like to compliment the ES6 code and the fact that the author used strict. Strict is a way of removing extraneous, unnecessary parts of JavaScript when you're coding. And I will have a little segment on that in the module.